Hi, everyone, and welcome again to GaudimusBiz22.com Podbean podcast and YouTube video. Very, very excited today. First, I'll introduce the guest, Dr. Jacob Imam, who is the vice president and founder of vice president of finance and founder of the College of St. Joseph the Worker, which is in Steubenville, Ohio. And I had the privilege of visiting their campus early December because I was taping the Matt Fradd show. You've been on the Matt Fradd show, right, Jacob?
I sure have. Yeah, well, it's easy to get on it when you're his friend and neighbor. So he
You're like literally 3 blocks from his old studio, but I think he's moved out now, right?
sadly so. Yeah, we miss him. It was a big loss in friendship, big loss for the
I
family.
may have been his last interview in the old studio. I'm not certain.
I beat you.
Uh,
I was the last.
oh, you were the last. Okay. I know right before me was Jonathan Pagao, and then I came on, I guess you, and it's
Yeah,
kind of a sad day. But
it
anyway,
was. Yeah.
welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm honored to be with you.
Uh, I when I was reading your bio and I thought, oh, I have to get Jacob on the show to talk about very, very many things. We're eventually going to be talking about what you're doing there, and it's just wonderful with St. Joseph the Worker, the College of St. Joseph the Worker, and everything, that the new polity guys are doing out there as well. And so I'm going to be interviewing, by the way, Andrew Willard Jones coming up sometime soon.
You can do no
Uh,
better than Andrew. Yep.
Oh, I mean, just God, the guy's a genius. Holy cow. I feel like a worm and no man when I'm reading his books. It's like here I thought I was a halfway educated human being.
Yeah.
And Andrew, as I often would tell my students some of whom were sometimes intimidated by coming into the professor's office and discussing things with, I would say, never be intimidated by anybody because no matter how educated a person is, remember that that person, when they're around other people, that there are people that person is going to feel stupid around. you know, there have been a few people in my life that like Dr. Germain Grisey, who I studied moral
Oh,
theology. I always
wow.
felt profoundly dumb when I was around Germain. And Andrew, when I'm reading Andrew Willard Jones, he's one of these guys that makes me feel like, oh my God, I'm really stupid.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not intelligent at all. I'm really dumb. But I'm really, all joking aside, I am looking forward to interviewing him. Anyway, I want to, before we get into the College of St. Joseph the Worker, I am just fascinated by your biography and your history. And I think my viewers and listeners would be very interested to know a little bit about the twists and turns of your life. You were raised a Muslim, right?
I was born a Muslim rather than I
Born.
would say raised a Muslim. My dad was born and raised in Jerusalem. His family moved there, as far as we can tell, around the year 800, and
Wow.
how's that for a lineage? And
I can't trace my lineage beyond Krakow in the middle 19th century, but
that's
that,
pretty good, though. That's better than most, I'd say. And he came from a powerful Muslim line. And his grandfather was the Mufti of Jerusalem. Excuse me, his great
wow.
grandfather was. His grandfather was the Imam of Al-Aqsa, or the Dome of the Rock,
Wow.
in Jerusalem. His father, my grandfather, started the first local travel agency in the Holy Land, actually, and breaking away from the clerical class and showing around the riches of that holy city. And then his one thing kind of problematic in the family happened. His arranged marriage fell through right before the wedding day. And that
Wow.
freed him up to be able to marry a beautiful American woman, my mom, who had moved there. And so they got married, eventually moved to the States, started a life there, and I came along. And so, but by the time that he had moved to the States, like many Muslims who find that the real practice of the faith can only really be exercised in a community followed by or ordered by their law.
Yeah.
The practice of the faith really started to wane for him, and
Oh,
so
okay.
so it was never much of a part of my life growing up. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. So he did he become kind of like a secularized Muslim or simply an Americanized Muslim who became sort of largely it doesn't sound like he became an unbeliever just so much as it just didn't mean that much to him.
That's right. It was, and at the end of his life, he was diagnosed with lung cancer 12 years ago. Died 7 months after that. It was a marvelous gift for whenever anybody knows that they're about to die, right? I mean, it
Yeah,
really gives you
yeah.
some ability to think deeply and reflect considerably about your life. And for him, it was a moment to say. To realize just how unfaithful he was to the convictions he said he held. And so he actually wrote some of these kind of marvelous letters to his friends and family, uh, a, in a certain sense, saying, "I regret everything that I did for my career." After he moved here,
Oh,
his
wow.
his his degree from Bethlehem University wasn't accredited, so he had to go through undergrad all over again, did it in 18 months, which I still have no idea how he managed.
Wow. That's
Then
incredible.
from there, ran off to University of Michigan to do his MBA do their MBA program, and then went into finance. And he ran a huge office at AT&T and then was a manager at Microsoft, wrote their algorithm for mergers and acquisitions. Um, and so that
Wow.
was, fairly complicated stuff, but also a lot of stuff that was forbidden according to Sharia. And so this was, him fully entering into what I would call the religion of America, our capitalistic religion. And so setting aside uh, the Islamic strictures to do so. So this
Wow,
was
there
something at the end of his life that he really, had to face head on. Like, I've been unfaithful to what I've said I believed, and I've done something else
wow,
instead.
that's interesting.
Yeah.
It goes to show too, uh, how corrosive in many ways American culture is to traditional religious belief. And obviously, I'm not a Muslim. I don't believe in Sharia law.
Hmm.
But that experience of needing, in a sense, to set aside the dictates of one's traditional faith, the faith that one was raised, in order to enter completely into the American landscape is not peculiar to your father's experience, right? That would
Yeah.
be something across the board of religious experience, even for, devout Catholics.
No doubt. There is a order of life here that just has no explicit creed or one that we don't recite in union with one another. And so our cult is weak, right? We're doing the
Yeah,
same things, but not necessarily doing it together in a cognizant way. And so there's that kind of break or that kind of cleavage from classical religion in the in from what we are doing as Americans, which
yeah.
is really all the same. We're pursuing our comforts, we're pursuing our desires, we're maximizing abstract elements of wealth instead of the harder assets of reality that help to prop up a livelihood and a family, and that enables us to be able to look beyond the material because we've perfectly entered into a monetary economy that is perfectly consumeristic. We have to just chug along and do the same thing day in and day out
We
to
do.
be able to
I
achieve
just
that.
remember in
Yeah.
1994 when I was first hired by DeSales University, and I was presented with the typical faculty TIAA CREF
Yeah.
retirement
Yeah.
package
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
involved investments in the stock market. And I remember wondering, I'm contributing to this. My institution is contributing to this. How many of the corporations to which we are aiding and abetting with our money are actually
Mhm.
doing things completely contrary to the faith?
Right, right. It,
You
it
know?
will, and of course, the companies that we're told that we're aiding are not the ones that truly are, right? Or they do so in an
Yeah.
indirect way. You put your money in Apple, but really it's BlackRock that benefits.
That's
You
the
put your
thing.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, you put your money in Google and actually it's Fidelity that gets the biggest win that day.
Yeah,
So,
because they lie and they hide and they shift and they shuffle and so on. But anyway, that's I mean, a rabbit hole we can go down later
mhm.
perhaps. But so you were, I mean, you sound a lot like me in one sense that you weren't raised in a particularly religious household.
Well, my mom converted to Protestantism after they
Oh,
moved back to the States. So she
okay.
was born and raised until she was 11 in a Catholic home. And that was actually kind of interesting because her family left over Humanae Vitae, but they had 8 kids already, so it's like, why don't you just keep going? Like, what's the problem?
What's a couple more kids?
Yeah,
Come
yeah,
on.
exactly. Well, grandma was 33. I guess they could have been more than a couple, but and I've heard this from others that the main predicament or the main thing that shook their faith in the church was that they had heard 2 different teachings on contraceptive, one that came out of the papacy, one that came out of the pulpit. And they said, well,
Yeah.
which is true, And so it wasn't really that issue, that one issue as much as it was the larger hierarchical claim of infallibility. So they left. She was 11 years old. I mean, she didn't have anything after that. Went off to the Middle East, lived there, met a Muslim, married him,
Yeah.
moved back to the States. All of a sudden, he's not really a Muslim. He's not practicing anymore. There's a whole bunch of
Yeah.
social questions that are coming on the scene in the 80s, obviously, and she's trying to make some decisions there. And
Yeah.
the Protestants next door invited her to a Bible study, and she thought, well, this sounds pretty good. And so it was really my dad coming in um, at night, telling me some things about the Quran, and then my mom sneaking in when he wasn't there and telling me some things about the Bible. And so there was definitely religion talked about in the
There
home, but
was
not
there
really
were elements
practiced.
there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I was saying I was both of my parents were Catholics, but they were very lukewarm. Catholic.
Okay.
They're much more devout now. Now that all the kids are out of the house, but when we were little, I went to public school. We attended mass, but not regularly. And religion just was not at all emphasized in my household. But anyway, it's not
Mm.
about me, it's about you. You are now a Catholic. So, and
Oh, Jesus Christ.
you
Yeah.
are educated in England, so we need to now move your biography forward a bit. And you came into the faith under the tutelage and influence of C.S. Lewis's secretary Walter Hooper. Now we have to hear about this, Jacob. This is a must-tell narrative.
Well, I moved to Oxford and it was a Thursday afternoon. And at this point in my life, I was a Orthodox catechumen and a Catholic catechumen. I pretty much said I'm done with the Orthodox catechesis, but it was still, heavy in my mind. And so I knew I needed to resolve that in my new home. And so next day, the Friday, I'm wandering around Oxford, getting to know the lay of the city. So beautiful.
Yeah,
And
I've been there.
isn't it marvelous? It's
It's a
just,
beautiful city. I love Oxford.
it was a gift to be there.
Yeah.
And I will pass by this one building and has a plaque, out front. It's clearly a church, and it said, where blessed, at that time, blessed, John Henry Newman preached, where Gerard Manley Hopkins was a curate, and where J.R.R. Tolkien was a parishioner. And I thought, well,
Yeah.
gosh, that's clearly where I got to go. And so they said Saturday morning, 10 a.m. Mass. I thought, I'm going to be there. I went. Afterwards, I'm looking around for somebody with a collar on to see if I could tap his shoulder and see if I could carry on with catechesis. And there was someone in the back, and he was talking to this elderly gentleman. And I kind of go up to them. I gave them their space, but they beckoned me over anyways. And the explained my situation. Just moved here. Would love to carry on with catechesis. Not quite sure if I'm entering. But would love to carry on. And the priest started to look around and said, "Well, actually, I'm not sure if I'm the one you're supposed to be talking to." And the older gentleman that he was speaking with pointed at him and says, "No, he's not the priest. He's the bishop." And I
Oh,
just had
wow. You
no
were right
idea
to
what
the
I was
top.
looking for. There. I couldn't identify purple at the time, I guess, or he wasn't wearing a pectoral cross, whatever it was. He then turns. and after being outed, and points, well, this is the man of Oxford. This is Walter Hooper. And Walter Hooper, as you said, was
Yeah.
C.S. Lewis's secretary at the very end of his life, just a
I
few
was just
months.
going to say he
Yeah.
must have been really getting on in years at that point.
Yep, he was. He was 80, gosh, 3 at that time, and had moved to Oxford after, I believe it was Austin Farrer had told him that he Lewis had died. Was an American. He
Yeah.
had been C.S. Lewis's pen pal for a decade before he finally came over and started to work for him. And he had to go back to the States where he was teaching at the University of Kentucky at the time. He had one last semester to finish up, and then he was going to return to England and then carry on being Lewis's secretary. And so he goes back, and at the very end of the semester, he gets a call that Lewis had sadly died in the end of November. And so he uh,
Yeah.
travels back to England for the funeral, and he's hearing what's going on, and he's wondering what he's going to do with his life now. He said he's to University of Kentucky. He's going to be done, and not really sure what's going to happen. And I believe it was Austin Farrer that told him that he believed there was a work for Walter to do. And so Walter said, "Okay, I'll do it." And he carried on curating Lewis's literary estate. And there was a very dramatic day that occurred not too long afterwards when Walter walked into Blackwell's famous bookstore in
Oh, I've been
downtown
there.
Oxford.
Great
Yeah.
bookstore. Yeah.
Oh, they boast of having something like 3.6 linear miles of bookshelves in the store. So it's amazing. And Walter walked in, and they started to take books off of the shelf and put them on Lewis's own books off of the shelf and cart them off. And Walter thought, well, not on my watch. And so he came up with this whole scheme of,
Oh,
I
wow.
bring if I publish more Lewis books, from his literary collection that hadn't been published before, or republish them, could we keep two older Lewis books in print? And Collins, now Harper Collins, said that sounds
HarperCollins.
good enough. And those books like Pilgrim's Regression and Abolition of Man,
My
were,
favorite.
yeah, that was out of print. Walter brought it back, and so that's how he
Wow.
spent
I
his
was not
life.
aware that Abolition of Man ever went out of print. That's a great if the only thing Walter Hooper ever did was to bring Abolition of Man back into print, that would have been a lifetime achievement
It
right
would
there.
have
One of the
been.
greatest books of the 20th century.
That's right. Yeah.
Absolutely prescient. Blackwell's bookstore. Let me get autobiographical for a second. This is to the, my first trip. I've been to Oxford 4 or 5 times. I went there usually for science and religion conferences, which were
Right.
held at St. Anne's College, one of
Hmm.
the newer
Newer
colleges.
ones. Yeah.
I remember I went the very first trip there. I went to Blackwell's bookstore and I bought so many books. I didn't want to pay for the shipping to send them. So what I did was I threw all my clothes away and I put my books in my suitcase. So yeah,
That's brilliant.
is that not the nerdiest thing to do? Only a stupid book nerd would throw all of his clothes away because he bought too many books at Blackwell's
So
bookstore.
naked, you marched onto that plane.
Well, yeah, I did retain the shirt on my back and the trousers, on my lower quarters. I did do that, but yeah, I came home without a whole lot of clothes, uh, but a
Brilliant.
great many books. It was great. Now, one more Oxford story before we move on. I'm assuming you've gone to Lewis's home, the Kilns.
I lived there. Yeah.
You lived at the Kilns?
I did for a glorious summer. I lived at the kilns. Yep.
Oh my goodness. I didn't even know that such a thing was possible.
Walter wrote a nice letter to the owners of the estate and said, any chance that Jacob could stay there for this time? And they said yes, and that was wonderful. And then they do. They have a rotating semblance of scholars that live in the
That
in
are,
the house
oh my
now.
God. I missed the boat on that regard. That would have been like a dream come true. The only reason I bring it up is I went to the kilns. We did a little tour, and we were told by the tour guide that when Lewis was there with his brother Warney, The two of them were such bachelors, such total bachelors. The place was a mess. But they used to, of course, Lewis didn't just smoke a pipe, he smoked cigarettes as well. And that they used to flick their ashes onto the rugs in the room because according to the tour guide, anyway, Lewis and his brother were convinced that spreading tobacco ashes all over the rug was a way of keeping bugs
The
away. And
moths.
the
Yeah, keep the
moths,
moths
yeah.
away. Yeah.
Uh, but one can only imagine what that house must have smelled like when Warney and Lewis lived there. The other thing that struck me was how small the pond is in the back.
Oh yeah. Could still fit a
You,
boat on it. Yeah.
yeah, I
Barely.
mean, you get the impression from reading Lowe that pond must have been this big, it's just like this
Yeah.
swampy little mud hole in the back behind the kilns.
So
But that's great. Yeah,
if you remember the house, there's one room is called the music room. And that
yes,
was where on I think it was Thursday evenings, Warney would pick a record and they would put it on the record player and they would just
yeah,
sit back and listen to this. And at one point there was someone in the house that played the piano and that was in there too. And that was where um ultimately Lewis had his final bedroom
yeah,
where
downstairs.
he, yeah, downstairs when he could no longer ascend the stairs any longer. And that was a place where his Anglican priest would come in and actually celebrate a liturgy and for him in his own household, where on the desk that he actually wrote the Narnia Chronicles on as well. And it was
Yeah.
ultimately in that room that Lewis passed away. And that was the room that I stayed in. And so when I would walk in, oftentimes the door on the wardrobe was quite loose in that room, and I would just walk in and go and open up, and I thought it was just Lewis's ghost going back and forth in and out of
The ghost
Narnia.
of C.S. Lewis coming in to haunt you.
Yeah.
What a singular privilege to have had that
Uh,
experience,
an
Jacob.
honor of a lifetime.
That is truly marvelous, especially for someone like me, for whom C.S. Lewis has always been a real hero. I mean, when I was still a teacher of undergraduates, I made very liberal use of Lewis's works in my intro to theology class. We always read Mere Christianity.
Yeah.
Uh, in various other classes, I would have them read The Problem of Pain, The Great
Right.
Divorce, The Abolition of Man. Uh, just so many on the space trilogy. Yeah, so
Mm.
many things, so many things. But anyway, so what brought you to all that aside, what brought you to the Catholic faith in particular?
I had come to a spot in my Christian life where I knew that I needed an authority to tell me what was true. When I was a teenager, uh, I started to have a real prick to my conscience that I was wrong and did something wrong and continually do things that are wrong. And I looked at my father's God and who just said, "Do better, try harder." And then I looked to my Protestant mother's God who really did something substantial for my sin and had a completely different character to God, to this God who we both consider either who both of them consider to be um, transcendent. But on my dad's
Yeah,
side, I didn't really believe that the character of God, as described in the Quran, would have been long-suffering and would have been tolerant to withstand our rebellion. But that's clearly who God was in the sacred scriptures, and that the entire narrative was a slow, methodical way of bringing us back, using such crazy techniques as, when we're worshiping men as gods, that he becomes a man so that we can worship him truly as
yeah,
God. Uh, that just blew me away and seemed obviously true, but I only knew really Protestants at that point, and so I entered a church that was very committed to worshiping him. And a few years later, it became very clear that if we didn't know certain things with certainty,
yeah,
then there was going to be a real barrier for us to be able to come into a more intimate relationship with God. In a certain sense, the whole personal relationship with Jesus Christ that Protestants like to talk so much about was was actually cut off at a certain point. It couldn't be too personal because we didn't know enough about him. We didn't have certainty about it. him in certain ways. Like, what is the Eucharist? Is it him or is it not? When are we supposed to
Yeah.
baptize or get baptized?
Yeah.
Is it, what does baptism even mean? If we don't have answers to this, then we actually don't have answers to the question of who the persons of God really are. And that inhibits our ability to love him. But even as frustrating as that was for me as a believer, how much more frustrating would that be for God himself? He wants
Yeah.
that intimate relationship with us even more than we do. And so if I find these to be contrived barriers from that relationship, then he wouldn't have placed them there. And so that put me on a track to find
And
traditional
and
Christianity.
you were on your way,
Yeah.
especially since I kind of went through an evangelical Protestant phase in my high school
Oh,
years.
did you?
I
Yeah.
did, yeah.
Huh.
Like I said, I was raised a
Yeah.
lukewarm Catholic,
Yeah.
and I eventually sort of read my way back into it actually began. My listeners know this. I mean, I was this little fire-breathing evangelical, didn't like the Catholic Church very much anymore, and I was going to this evangelical Christian bookstore, and the proprietor there eventually saw me buying these more theologically inclined kind of books. And he said, "You might like this guy that I had never heard of, C.S. Lewis."
Oh,
Because
come on.
evangelicals love C.S. Lewis, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Because
yeah.
he's into apologetics, and the evangelicals are all into apologetics. They don't get, so many evangelicals don't understand that C.S. Lewis is a gateway drug to Catholicism. He,
Totally.
he,
Yeah.
he really is. He's the gateway drug out of evangelicalism and into more liturgical sacramental religions. So
Hmm.
I read Lewis, and then eventually he mentioned this guy in one of his letters named G.K. Chesterton. I read Chesterton, and then that turned me on to Newman, and then bing, bang, boom. Before I know it, I'm a Catholic and I'm in
You're
the
done
seminary.
for.
Yeah, and I'm
Yeah.
done for. But the point is this, though. The one of the things that I found most intellectually unsatisfying about my evangelical years was that it did eventually dawn on me that the scriptures are not self-interpreting. They're not perspicacious.
Hmm.
And by that, I don't mean, and Protestants often misunderstand this, that what I was looking for was a pope in Rome to tell me what every scripture verse now means in a definitive way. It's not the way it works. It's that in Catholicism, what we find is an ongoing tradition of discourse
Hmm.
and interpretation in the saints, in the doctors of the church, in Augustine, in Aquinas, in the fathers, and
Hmm.
also in papal documents and ecumenical councils that
Right.
then create this web, this massive intellectual theological web of discourse that frame the scriptures, in like a home.
Hmm.
Uh, and that's the best way that I can put it. Is that kind of what that you found as well?
Absolutely. One of the most satisfying things that I found in the tradition was a method of even approaching God, right? I mean, this
Yeah.
is when we look at the sacred scriptures, we have this great treasury of insight, but of course we need to be taught how to read it properly, and that's of course what Jesus himself first did on the road to Emmaus, and then he carries on that teaching in his disciples and they carry it on into their disciples, and it goes through and through and through the tradition, and to the point where the earliest receivers of the first teachings of the apostles are the church fathers. I mean, even just you consider
Yeah.
this as a historical point, it seems obvious that they would have a more clear insight about what the original teachings of the sacred text was, because they're within a generation of the apostles themselves. So even if you just wanted to be clear cut on who do you think has better access here, it's clearly those guys. So when the scholastics then refined the theological method to being to being an entrance into Revelation to the inspired word of God, but through the church fathers, they set up a method that we're still to be using today. And I do find, I have to say, and this is maybe just a complete tangent that's of no value, but the fact that we have turned more and more into theologians that are just interested in saying what the church has written on it or what the church has said about it. That is a method of called codification. It's
Yeah, yeah,
actually like a form of legal positivism without understanding, well, what was the deep in the divine mystery
yeah.
that led to this decision in the first place. That's what we have to first be uncovering, or else we're never going to be developing doctrine even further. We're actually never even taking on the true apostolate of a theologian if we're not taking on that same method that the church has
Wow.
already defined. And so that's something that is, to bolster your point of it's not completely misunderstood, or it's not when the Protestants make the mistake of thinking that we're just told what to believe. It's like, well, they're looking around at people doing that sort of codification methodology,
Yeah,
and they're rightly saying that doesn't seem right. And we, further into, who would,
yeah.
um, who love the church fathers, love the scholastics, love the methodology that they've passed on, we would say, actually, Protestants, you are right about that, but that's not true Catholicism. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. I mean, what the church introduces you to is a whole mystagogic pedagogy
There
for
you
how
go.
to approach the scriptures.
Mhm.
I mean, the fourfold sense of scripture
Yeah.
and the whole view of scripture as an entryway into deep and profound mysteries about God that God has revealed to us through his son and in these documents and beyond and that the revelation of that mystery includes the saints and the liturgy and so many things that are just gorgeous and beautiful uh, that I have all these Protestant friends and they have all these questions and I just said I just want you to experience the beauty of Catholicism more than anything
Mhm.
because it is the beauty of this faith that will absolutely smite your soul if you just let it.
Yeah, it is true. No, I think when we're trying to unveil ourselves to a true approach to God, it
Yeah.
has to be in a way that's being led, that the truth and goodness is truly being led on by beauty. To steal a line from von Balthasar, that the little sister of truth and goodness is taking
Yeah,
care
I know. We're
and
we're
going
both
first.
fans
Yeah,
of Word on Fire. We're both
yeah, yeah.
fans of Bishop Barron, and I think he's so right to say, we have to, in a sense, begin with beauty, beauty connected to truth and goodness, but beauty. Now, let's move on and say, I mean, this is all great, but you did your doctoral dissertation where you brought together theology and economics, right? It wasn't,
Mhm.
I think. So, what were the specifics of your doctoral research, and does that still have a bearing on what you're doing? And let's sort of use this as a segue into talking about the College of Saint Joseph the Worker, but we'll get there. Right now, I'm just more interested in
Yeah.
dissecting your brain here, your theology. Uh, because so much of modern theology is theology and this theology, like I was so many years
Mm,
theology and science theology, so
mm.
you're like a theologian interested in economics. How did that play out?
Right. Well, part of it was because of my father's background, and that
Yeah,
he was hopeful that I would carry on in his shoes, as it were, and I was heading in that path for a little while, working at a venture studio, certainly in private investment as well, and so that when I came into the church, it seemed like I was hearing a lot on sexual ethics, a lot of do's and don'ts, mainly don'ts, right? But then it seemed like I was handling my money just in the exact same way as everybody else was as well. And Jesus talks about money all the time, and it can't just be that I have a slightly different disposition towards it, but then I live exactly like
yeah.
someone else. Like if my internal disposition is so different, how is it that my external actions are exactly the same as the spiritual but not religious person in America
Hence
today?
why we started a Catholic worker farm and I quit my job and I moved out into the woods.
Yeah, exactly. I gotta look different somehow.
Yeah,
Christ
exactly.
claims every
Anyway,
bit of
I,
me,
I
right? Yeah.
interrupted. Go ahead.
No, no, well, it's the same impulse, and so then I started to look around and ask the questions about who's talked about this, and I'm getting this big vacuum, that there's plenty of people who have talked about Catholic economics and that how different it is from a liberal economic theory or socialist economic theory, but very little had spoken about the very nature of money. And yet, when you look at the church fathers, that's the thing that they're yelling about most. When you find that it is not just how you handle money, but actually the design of the technology itself was
Yeah.
what they were pointing out as being a predicament. That guys like Saint Gregory the Great or Saint Bonaventure claiming that when the thorns choked out the seed, that was not just a love of wealth, that was wealth itself. Or
Oh, yeah.
so some saying that in the case of Thomas Aquinas, or saying that that when commenting on St. Paul says that the love of money is the root of all evil. It's not that, it's the wishing money to be your last end and treating it as such, but using it for every end instead, that you are constantly turning to the use of money rather than doing something yourself, and that money is designed to be a universal good and so tempts you into that. Those are problems with the very design of the technology itself. But of course, the spiritual Franciscans were wrong. You can touch money and still go to heaven. And so how do we square that problem? That was what I was so interested in, still very interested in, and what I worked on
Well,
for
it
my
interests me. I
education.
mean, I do write on it still. I mean,
Mhm.
Dorothy Day, of course, was a big devotee of voluntary poverty,
Right.
and she was a big critic of American style capitalism,
Yeah.
as am I.
Hmm.
And yet, there is no silver bullet, no magic bullet, no one size fits all theological theory about money. So
Mm.
that, well, how much is too much, and what are
Right.
you allowed to use it for, and what are you not? It's kind of like the similar problem, I think, relates to technology.
Mm.
Okay. Heidegger famously posed the question of technology, and it's a problem that many modern Catholic thinkers, all the way up through Pope Francis and Laudato Si,
Hmm.
where we criticize and talk about the technological paradigm.
Hmm.
But then, okay, do we all become Catholic Amish then? Well, even the Amish burn kerosene. Okay,
Right.
so isn't that a kind of technology? I mean, even
Right.
they use metal tools. Isn't that a kind of tech? What's the point of demarcation then, returning to economics, between, too much money, not enough money? These are, is it okay to take interest on a loan? Is it
Right.
okay to invest in the stock market? And, can I have a house with 5 bedrooms instead of just three? And these are all burning questions, right?
Right. But this is what we often tend towards in our modern culture is saying, what's the answer? What's a clear-cut
Yeah,
answer to this stuff?
yeah,
And if there was a clear-cut answer, then you could just be a computer yourself and not a human being, right? Like you don't need to then be a prudentially minded, discerning creature who has the image of God on you. You could be pre-programmed. And that is really the golden ticket, is that you do need to take in consideration what is genuinely prudent, to be able to serve those under your care, and to ensure that you have what you need to be virtuous, right? Because you could
yeah.
not have what you need to be virtuous. That's very possible, and something that St. Thomas
And
himself
there are
makes.
different charisms too, different charisms in the
Well,
church.
exactly.
I remember
Yeah.
I once knew a woman, I won't mention her name, many years ago now. She was very wealthy, very, very wealthy woman.
Mhm.
And we were in this group, this spiritual group together through our church. And we had one of our meetings, and she came up to me and she said, Larry, I made a momentous decision in my life. I've really decided to devote myself more fully to the spirituality of St. Francis of Assisi
Okay.
and his
Wow. Oh my gosh.
approach to material possessions. And I said, "Oh my goodness, that's really something." I said, "So, what charities and so forth have you decided to give all of your money to, and your possessions away to, and so forth?"
Yeah.
I said, "This is really something." She goes, "Well, what are you talking about?" I said,
Yeah.
"Well, you're going to follow the teachings of St. Francis of Assisi. His spirituality is that he gave everything away. that to be a Franciscan in that regard, in the spirituality of Assisi means I take what I have and I give it away. And she goes, "Oh, no, no, I simply mean I'm going to strive to be more detached from my possessions." To which I said to her, "That's not Francis of Assisi. Francis of Assisi was, you will detach yourself from your possessions when you detach yourself fully from your possessions, when you give them away. Otherwise, what you're talking about, perhaps," and I said to her, then I climbed off my high horse and said, "What you're talking about there is more the spirituality of maybe one of the sainted French kings or something like that. Yeah, you're talking about a spirituality of detachment from wealth more than a Franciscan spirit." But my
And here's a
point
hair
is,
shirt. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, yeah, my point is simply,
yeah.
I was trying to get her to see there are different charisms in the church, and
Yeah.
and obviously, I don't think your charism is that of the Franciscans.
Well, and it very well could be for her, right? Potentially.
In her own
But
way.
well, no, and she just didn't do it, right? I mean,
Oh, that's right.
right.
I
That's what
mean,
I mean to say, right?
yeah,
We we
exactly.
we easily could be ignoring the invitations that God's given us. I do think, though, despite saying that it is prudence that's going to be carrying on in your own discernment, there are these what I would call like heuristics, like good suggestions that the church gives us, right?
That's right.
I mean, the big three are the evangelical council, like those.
That's right.
What are the councils? Well, it's gospel advice. That's what those terms mean, right? The advice. You want to be a saint? Well, here's our advice. Be obedient. You know, be poor, be chaste, right? And try and
Yeah.
figure out how to incorporate that into your life and into your personal vocation as much as possible. Um, I think there are other, heuristics to like keep a watch out for, when it comes to money. A big one for me, I think, is something that I've stolen from St. Thomas Aquinas, where he says that money and friendship are at opposite sides of a spectrum from one another. That love always takes the place, or money takes a place for where love lacks, is the way that I like to phrase it.
Wow.
So if you can just think about, say, moving something. I could call up my buddies and say, hey, I got to move a piano, or I could call a moving company to do that. I'm completely dependent on other people in both situations, right? But one
Yeah.
I know, and one I rely on the currency of friendship, and the others I don't know, and I rely on the currency of money to handle, right? You
Yeah,
could
so
take
very,
on. Oh, sorry,
so
go ahead.
very true. I mean, the rule of charity is oftentimes bypassed by our dependence financially on paying people to do. I mean, for example,
Mm.
people often misunderstand Dorothy Day, and I can't tell you how many people I know who think Dorothy Day was a socialist and a
Oh,
believer
sure.
in socialism. And yet Dorothy Day opposed Social Security when Franklin Roosevelt introduced it. She opposed the Leviathan of the state on the grounds that it robs people of the opportunity to engage in charity. She
Mhm.
thought that it was the nanny state, the beginnings of the nanny state, that would infantilize us all and make us all dependent on this monetary system.
She kind of
And
called that one, didn't she? Yeah.
no, she really did. And I say that in full hypocrisy mode because I take Social Security.
Right, right. Yeah.
I do deposit my Social Security check every month, dutifully. But anyway, that's what I tell people is the goal is to live a life of material simplicity. And you have to be the judge of that. To live the most materially simple life that you're capable of. That's what I
Mhm.
tell people in your state in life.
Hmm. Oh, that seems right.
Well,
And
especially if you have
there's one.
children.
Say it again. Sorry.
Especially if you have children, you have to.
Oh yeah.
I mean, you have to make sure your children are taken care of properly,
Hmm.
right? It's not fair to your. If you have like five kids, it's not fair to say, oh, we're going to give everything away and we're going to go live under a bridge now. No,
Right.
you can't do that's irresponsible.
Well, I believe it was Leo the 13th, and I also believe in Rare Navarre, but I can't tell you which paragraph number, where he says that it's part of the role of the husband and the father to lead the family in saving the best part for others.
Yeah.
If my job as a father to my three little boys is to make them saints, or enable that path as best I can for them to willfully choose that intimacy with God, then I should be modeling it. I should be demonstrating it to them, and spoiling them is actually antithetical to that principle task that God has set before me. And that I think is what Pope Leo is speaking about in that
I think
sense.
that's beautiful. I think that is so true, that we need to lead our children in the path of the evangelical counsels
Mhm.
by showing them the
Mhm.
evangelical counsels, showing them the path to holiness. But let's
Mhm.
segue now. Okay, so how you are now vice president and co-founder at this thing called the College of St. Joseph the Worker.
I am. A big part of the question for being here, founding it in the first place, was really, in between my master's and my doctorate, I'm sitting with one of my friends who was working at admissions at a college in the South, and he kind of put his head in his hands at some point, thinking that his sales pitch to prospective students and their parents was wrong, and that his conscience really couldn't handle it. He was telling them that college was a worthwhile endeavor because education was good in and of itself, and that college was a financially advantageous path for a young person today. And he said, "Well, the education's not worthwhile in and of itself at my school, and it's
Yeah,
certainly deleterious as a financial decision if you are going into the humanities of any stripe, that you're going to be trained in such a way as, as to hopefully, the best case scenario, understand the truths that make life most human. Maybe not at his institution, but hopefully that's the goal.
yeah,
But you're not going to be technically trained in anything to be able to go and fend yourself out in an economy that really has just become a cash nexus where you have to get money to be able to survive, which just is not true for every era in civilization, but it's certainly true in ours. So you have a great classics degree. Well, your goal then is to go off and, I guess, be a teacher. But you're making thirty
yeah.
thousand dollars a year and you're $40,000 in debt. That's a rough situation, right? And that's what he was bemoaning. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, I'm about to go off and get my doctorate, and I'm gonna go off and start being a professor. I'm gonna put kids in the same situation that he is, and my buddy's all guilt-ridden about it. I'm certainly gonna be guilt-ridden about it, but we have to do something. We can't just let higher education die. The Catholic Church created the first institutions of higher education. She did
Yes, it
so for
did.
a very important reason, that priests might be able to preach better, so that the kingdom of God might actually, physically, in reality, come about here and now. That's something that we have to keep alive, and therefore the importance of higher education, particularly at this moment in history where everybody has forgotten that Christianity is a social reality and Christ's kingship is not a nice fairy tale, but is reality that we are supposed to be bowing to. We need to keep higher education alive for that end more now than ever, perhaps. And
Yeah.
so we can't just be on the boat to say higher education is bunk, we got to get rid of it. We have to reclaim it. That's our institution as Catholics. So
Boy, yeah,
that's
it's
what we
so
do.
true. I mean, one of the reasons why I got out of, university teaching wasn't just that I wanted to live a more radical life of material simplicity and
Mm,
the Catholic worker farm and so on. It was also a powerful feeling of complicity in a system, a university system that was wholly unjust. I mean,
mm,
my university was Catholic in its theology and philosophy department and not Catholic in any other way. So,
right.
they might get good theology in one of our theology classes and then they trot off to read the poetry of lesbian Eskimos, in the English department, 19th century lesbian Eskimo poetry. They wouldn't be reading Shakespeare and all the other garbage, and so and then paying 80 grand a year to do that for the
Yeah.
privilege
All
of
t
the
all
privilege.
two lesbian Eskimo poems that there are for the
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
yeah, yeah.
And and the thing is, eventually, it begins you begin to realize corruptio optima pessima. The corruption of the
Right.
best is the worst. And
Yeah.
there's something uniquely awful and hideous when
Hmm.
you witness a Catholic, a putatively Catholic university saying, we want to look just like our secular counterparts. We want to go after the latest woke DEI initiatives. We want to go after the latest and most cutting edge post-critical Marxist critical theory deconstruction of everything. We
Right.
want to pursue all of that, and we want to, in a sense, instill that nihilistic, anti-God, anti-everything ethos of identity politics into our students, into our young people, and then to send them out into the world in tremendous debt. That is not a caricature. That is not a
Oh.
caricature. That is not a stereotype. That is what we are doing in Catholic higher education these days. It's utterly bankrupt. And then they turn around and mouth platitudes about social justice. We as an institution, our values are social justice, which really simply means we're about sexual minorities anymore. I mean, when I was growing up, the Catholic left, and I'm on a rant now.
I
When
love
I
it.
was
Keep
growing
going,
up,
Larry.
the Catholic left, the Dan Berrigans of the world were concerned with world poverty, world peace, the military industrial complex, and all that kind of stuff. Now all we care about are drag queen bathrooms for fourth graders. Okay, this is the decadence and the destruction of higher education, and Catholic institutions have bought into this nonsense. All right, so, which is a big reason why I got out of the racket. And many of my friends are also now getting out of the racket. So when I started reading, okay, I'm getting off my soapbox now.
You totally fine.
Serenity now, serenity now. I'm back into reality. When I started reading about the College of St. Joseph the Worker, I don't know who first told me about it. Somebody sent me a thing, say, hey, these new polity guys, man, they're starting this thing called the College of St. Joseph the Worker. I started reading about it, and I thought, holy crap. I have a dear friend, Matthew Nickel. He's a farmer.
Mhm.
He's a PhD in English, taught at a college near me, got sick of academia, devout Catholic. He left the academic world too to start a farm, but his dream was to create the kind of college that you've created. He just didn't have the funding and the backing to do it. You guys have done it. You guys have actually pulled this off.
I lost all my hair in the process, but as you know, it's a better look. So,
Well, I like to tell people I did once have hair.
yeah.
Maybe one of these days I'll post on the blog a picture of me as a young man with
Yeah.
hair.
You know what? It has been what's the way to say it? Um, Something that has driven us by conviction to do more work than we could have ever dreamt of. The process that it's taken of first convincing people that this idea had legs, it was good in itself, and that it was worth taking the risk on of something that could easily fail, right? I mean, it's never been
Yeah.
tried before. The model's very risky. It's exceedingly complex. It's terrifying to organize all these various parts. It's a marvelous calculus to get everything working in concert with one another. It's really been a delight to be a part of on that organizational and strategic front. Uh, that was great for a few years. But then when students arrived, who really understood that they wanted to pursue a life of the mind that would radically transform their active life, and to be able to take on the same noble work
Yeah.
that the Lord incarnate assumed during his time on earth, has really been quite
Well, yeah,
mind
and that
blowing, I guess. And I would say for this reason, just to finish this thought, is that
oh no, I'm sorry.
these
Go
guys are
ahead.
brilliant. I mean, they're rejected offers from elite colleges and universities. Uh, I mean, our average standardized test score, as much as that's worth something, is the 90th percentile. I mean, these are really high performing students who the world has told, don't you dare think about being a tradesman. And they thought, no, that's exactly what I'm going
Yeah.
to do. I'm going to wed together the head and the hands, the active and the contemplative, that I might be a more truly incarnate creature after our Lord Christ.
And that brings me to the fact it's suddenly striking me. Many, many, many of my viewers and listeners may not be aware of what it is that you actually do, what it is that we're talking. I'm sitting here assuming everybody knows what you brought together are the liberal arts and the trades, right?
Mhm. That's right.
So, and I saw your like massive like woodworking. So right now it seems like the emphasis is on carpentry and the woodworking carpentry sorts of skills.
It's certainly been the principal interest of our students, I would say, that people are interested in working with wood. I think in part because you see the greatest transformation in carpentry. You see the beautiful oak, and then at the end of it, you see this marvelous table. That movement from purely natural, breaking down the wood, chopping, bucking, all the way to breaking down the board, finishing it, gluing it up, sanding it, finishing it. That's a process that you can see from start to finish, which is marvelous. I think that electrical is our second major track, which is completely different. One is a very traditional trade. One's a very modern trade. Both though invite real competency and an ability to understand the world that you have just been given. I mean, lights just turn on, right?
Yeah.
The refrigerator just keeps things cold. We completely dependent upon electrical for our day-to-day life, and yet we feel completely ignorant about how it works. And I think there's an ability in the trades to actually cut through um, the ignorance, this kind of oblique technological landscape that we're in, to really understand what it is that we are dependent on, and so as to be masters of it rather than to be slaves to it.
Oh man, that's so well put. I was given a schooling in how ignorant I am of electrical things in particular when we wanted to do some upgrades on our own, just our circuit breaker box here at the house. So I had an electrician come over, local guy, great guy. And, and he started asking me all these questions. Now, do you want circuit A to be so many watts, blah, 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 and the voltage, blah, 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 shimmy shang, watt, voltage, blah, blah. And my head's like, I, I don't know. Can we do a thing where if I hit this switch, stuff turns on? Can we do that? Can we do a thing where a switch works and I don't blow a fuse? That's what I'm looking for here. That's what I'm looking. And he just smiled at me and said, "Okay, you don't understand a word I'm saying right now. I don't have any idea what you're talking about."
English, please. Yeah, that's right. I mean, you're talking about the question of technology earlier. I mean, that in the technological paradigm, it's, in part, we're welcomed into that way of thinking that everything
Yeah.
has a switch because everything almost does has
Yeah.
a
I
switch
said to the
today.
guy, see, you see on the wall here, what I want is that when I do this to this switch, stuff comes on
Yeah,
and
work your
stays on.
magic. Yeah, yeah.
That's what I want. He said, okay.
That is
I think we could
great.
do that. But that's what you're doing. You are bringing together the intellectual and the tactile. Peter Morin, who was the co-founder of the Catholic Worker Movement with Dorothy Day, when he spoke about the Catholic Worker Farms, referred to them as agronomic universities,
Right,
which
yeah.
which is a phrase that I love. And what he meant was that we need to retrieve the ability for people to in a sense regain these tactile skills,
Right.
these artisanal skills, to and not just so that you have an independence and you can do things on your own. Like you were describing before, when you make a table yourself, when you mill the wood
Mhm.
and you process the wood and you create this table, there's a sense of accomplishment there that's deeply spiritual. Like we have sheep and we shear them, and my wife processes the fleece into wool and spins it into yarn, and she
Wow.
she teaches people how to do this. And it's amazing to me the number of young people in particular that are just mesmerized by this process. All right. And there's a deeply, profoundly incarnational Christian impulse in all of this, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, well, I think so. And in part, we as Americans hyper focus on if I own the asset, then nobody can control me. And that's better than not owning the asset and having people,
Y- Yeah.
control you, right? But the Catholic tradition goes further than that founding father American one, insofar as it says you own so as to be able to have a greater capacity of giving than you otherwise would.
Yeah.
The fact that I might have more skills than my neighbors means that I am also obligated to do more things for my neighbor because I have a greater capacity to be able to do them.
Oh
Um,
my goodness. Oh, Jacob, I'm so glad you brought this up because I think this is a powerful point. Uh, One of the things that has most helped me here, we've been on this farm for 12 years, and my wife calls me the YouTube farmer because I didn't know how to do anything. I just
That's
learned,
great.
yeah, how do I butcher a chicken? How do I butcher a pig? Well, it's
Yeah,
on
yeah.
YouTube. Somebody will show you on YouTube. My point is this, though. I would not have been able to do what I do here were it not for the aid and help that I have gotten from my neighbor up the road, I
Mm.
call him an old buzzard, 74-year-old old buzzard. Bob Hallowich is his name. His family homesteaded here, centuries ago and all that. But this is a wizard who can do anything with his hands. He can make anything, fix anything, and the point I'm trying to make is the point you just made. His ability to help me uh, has been a powerful witness to the depth of charity in his soul to me. That he never takes any money, never, all I have to do is get on the phone and say, Bob, my tractor's stuck again. And boom, he's down here with his bulldozer and his winch and, saying, no, you got to string it up through this tree and around the yard and blah, blah, blah. And yeah, it's there. You're out of the mud. It's like, wow, how did you do that? It's a model of charity, right?
It is. There's no doubt. I mean, when I could mention off of a half a dozen guys just like you could to spell this point out more, but it is, this is part of the reason why it's so important and actually incumbent upon us to grow in skill is because we actually then have an ability to love our neighbors more, for them to come into that more intimate relationship with them, to then actually then have that as an aid in our evangelization of them and of course of ourselves as well, the transformation of our lives. If I'm trying to be a saint, which means entering into the same self-giving that God has wrought for eternity, means that I
Yeah.
need to be able to know myself, to develop myself, to turn the potentials into actuals so that I might then give myself. And so this is one of the reasons why I believe just naturally the skilled and dignified tradesman, what we might call like the gentleman tradesman, to steal that word from the
Yeah.
gentleman farmer, uh,
Yeah.
does just naturally become a leader in his community. He becomes somebody that has kind of de facto authority in his parish because everybody looks to him to say, "I don't know how to do it. Do you know how to do it?" And I'm getting to know all
Yeah.
these tradesmen constantly, in my role here, and it is almost like a universal rule is that these people are committed to their place because they don't have to move. They're not transient like most Americans are. They
Oh,
understand.
yeah.
They understand, and so they're committed to their place. They understand how things work in this oblique technological landscape when most people don't. They have a capacity to do something that most people do not have. They don't have the same financial anxieties that most people do because they never got up to their eyeballs in debt during their 20s, and that they've just carried on in an industry that is necessary and not just a luxury. And they also have that, I would say, like a psychological stability insofar as at the end of every day the world actually looks different as a result of their labor. Like they have that
Yes.
ability to take a step back at the end of the day and said, okay, something's actually different. Things could have gone very wrong, but things look different. Whereas at the end of the day, I get up from my spreadsheets and the computer closes and everything looks the same, right? And how many of us are in
Yeah.
that same situation?
And oh, go ahead.
And so I just think like you add these factors together, you add a few more. I think this is one of the reasons why this phenomenon of seeing all these tradesmen leaders keep coming
Yeah.
up through the orbit.
So it strikes me that this model of higher education. at least right now,
Hmm.
probably appeals more to young men than to young women, right?
You nailed that one. Yep. Our first class of 30 with 29 men and one woman.
Yeah. Now, is that something? I mean, there's a part of me that says, well, isn't that kind of natural?
Totally.
Uh,
Yeah.
Men want to be electricians and carpenters and roofers and plumbers, and women just don't. For whatever reason. I'm not making any essentialized Platonic point
Sure.
about
Yeah.
how women have to stay in a certain profession. And I'm sure you would accept any woman into your program that wants to, join. But what maybe then would be the equivalent Catholic higher education
Mm.
for women would be a question that I might pose.
Yeah, it's a great question, and people have, brought this up to us before, and they'll mention things that, again, not to try and put anything in the corners. These are just what suggestions have been. Something like,
Yeah, sure.
like uh, like cooking school or like high-end sewing, sort of that sort of thing, and
Yeah.
those are fair enough. But what um and that might be a great thing for someone else to start. One thing that is was very heavy upon my heart and certainly a priority in my mind is seeing the economic stability of our students. And the trades
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
are kind of a 9 to 5. I mean, more than that, a 60-hour a week sort of
Yeah.
job. That's not fitting for someone that's going off and being a mother, right? Or
Yeah.
hoping
Yeah.
to be, right? And so there is a natural fit for the husband that is going off to do that sort of work. Um, and so to try and then take other aspects of homemaking that are excellent, like demand real skill and real quality, and then trying to commercialize them when perhaps they don't need to be is something that just personally a little bit hesitant on, and why
Yeah,
I'm
no, I
excited
agree. I mean, the
to
model has got to be that you're trying to equip young men in particular to
hmm
be breadwinners for the family. I mean, you're
hmm
teaching them a trade so that they can raise a family and also to be in the world with a Catholic presence in that particular trade,
absolutely.
making a difference in that regard. Yeah. So I just am talking off the top of my head. I'm not being critical at all. It just suddenly struck me. I bet this is more of a dude thing than a dudette thing. Because I'm thinking of my wife. She does teach people how to spin. There are very,
Neat.
very few young dudes that are interested in her lessons in how to spin. It's almost
Mm,
universally young women
mm,
who are drawn to this. Once in a while, there is a guy that's like, "Wow, that's really cool," and he wants, but then he loses interest after a while. Once he masters it, it's like, okay, that's fine. But what this has got to do with me making a living someday? Nothing.
right.
But the girls and the young women that get into they view it as something relating to the future homemaking
Yeah.
skills in that regard. So it's very just it's go ahead.
No, no, I just agree. My wife, her father was a carpenter for his entire career, and they grew up on she grew up on a small farm herself. We're on a farm now. We abuse our cows, maybe a little bit too much. I really hope the bees survive the winter. But goodness me, it is such a great gift that my wife actually has some of these real skills to
Oh
us,
yeah,
to benefit to our whole household as well. And so these are
yeah.
perhaps in some ways just as practical for man as for woman, but servicing different aspects of the vocation, I think. So,
What is interesting, I mean, speaking of land and farms, and it's off topic, but we have dairy. We don't have cows. We have dairy goats and stuff.
mm,
It's very instructive. I mean, I'm a Nebraskan and I grew up in Nebraska. I didn't grow up on the farm, but if you grew up in Nebraska, tons of people farm.
mm,
And one of the things that you growing up in Nebraska in an agricultural state, and I now know it living on a small farm, is the extent to which women are the heart and soul of any farm.
mm,
That the absolute importance of the woman on a farm is of critical I mean, and I don't mean just in terms of cooking, and I mean doing everything on the farm, from
Yeah.
driving tractors to baling hay to milking animals, collecting eggs, butchering chickens. I mean, women are essential to farm life in ways that I can't even emphasize enough.
I'm witnessing that. Absolutely.
Yeah, well, that's a jog. I thought to myself, I bet Jacob is witnessing firsthand that his
Yeah.
wife she's pretty killer on the farm.
Yeah, all of our animals would be dead at this point. Yeah.
Oh God, yeah. My wife's like a bulldozer here on the when I'm like, it's cold, I don't want to go outside. And she's bundling it up. It's like, okay, out we go, let's go. We gotta
That
break
makes
up
me
the
feel
ice.
so much better, Larry. I gotta
It's
be
like I'm
honest,
like,
that
I'm
really does.
cold. I don't want to go out. So we gotta go out. My wife's like, okay, hon, out we go. You know. So
I,
anyway,
I'm
so
gonna tell her
this
you said that. Yeah.
oh yeah, it's just my wife shames me all the time in this regard. Well, it sounds like okay, so your program is it a 4-year program?
It is it's a full bachelor's degree that we
Right.
have on offer, and so this is what I was bringing up earlier with this kind of financial stability, or at least my hesitation with these other universities, is that we have married together the time in the classroom with the top time training on the job site, for which our students do get paid quite well, I have to say, as um, in such a ways that they're stable throughout their time
Good.
here. Hmm.
That's excellent. That's very good. And so you're in Steubenville, Ohio,
The beautiful one. Yeah.
it's a financially stable operation. So how would any young person interested in and attending your College of St. Joseph the Worker, what do they have to do? You obviously have a web page, right?
We do collegeofstjoseph.com. On there, you'll find a tab that says apply. We hope that you do so. Last year we had about a 24% acceptance rate, but I hope that doesn't scare anybody away. We really want to ensure that these are students that are totally committed to the life of the hands as well as to the life of the mind. And um,
Didn't you guys just get some kind of $5 million grant?
It was that was a nice check to receive, I gotta tell you. So that was all right. It was a grant from the state of West Virginia, and if anybody knows Steubenville, we're right next door to West Virginia.
Right.
We look across the Ohio River at Weirton, West Virginia, and it was particularly for economic development. And so we're actually now what we've done is an integral part of the college model is having a construction company that our students work for, and the same master craftsmen that are guiding their work are the same ones that are actually teaching them in the classroom for their related instruction training as well. And so they have this double relationship that works out very well. And so our first projects are going to be building, putting actually new infrastructure into West Virginia. So 100% of that money is
Good.
going right back to our neighbors across the way, and we're going to be able to pay our
That's
students to be able to
fantastic.
do that good work. Yeah.
Well, I only bring it up, obviously to toot your horn, but also to
Oh,
let
thanks.
people know this that you are a financially stable entity, that you've made a go of it, that you're
Yeah.
successful at what you're doing. I mean, when I was there, I was shown a building, a great big huge building you guys purchased in downtown Steubenville, right? That you're going to be renovating. So
Yeah.
this is an enterprise on the move, man.
It is, it's funny how all these things do come together when you have a dream, but then St. Joseph starts to make it a reality. Where we first bought our workshop, just, down the street from, not, hardly just a few buildings over from our main administration office. It's literally across the street from our, what was once the federal courthouse in Steubenville. That will be our main academic building at maturity. We're just now under contract for the square that's in the middle of all
Yeah.
these things. So, it went from being a pretty average, dilapidated Rust Belt downtown, average for that, to actually having some real proximate cohesion to it as a campus. And so it's been marvelous to see the transformation so far. I think it's just going to continue to be a marvel and a wonder to
And
watch
your little
for
store there
years
has
to come.
got great merchandise. The hoodie I bought for my wife there, she loves that thing. She says
Awesome.
it's the best, warmest hoodie she's ever had. It's a Carhartt, right?
All right. Well, there you go. Hey,
It is
if
you
you're
can't
going to
go
be in
wrong with
trade
a
school, you got to get the good stuff. So,
That's right. You can't go wrong with a Carhartt merchandise. We're a Carhartt family here,
That's
so
great.
yeah. So you got great merch, as I like to say, great merch. So,
Thank
well,
you.
hey, Jacob, thanks for coming on the show today. You guys are doing absolutely fantastic things out there. I wish I could roll the clock back 45 years and do some things over again. In other words, I would have loved to have been involved in something like that as a young man. I just think what you're doing is a model for the future, and I hope that it's highly successful. So thanks for coming on.
Thanks so much, Larry. I appreciate it so much.
And any young dude out there or young lady who is interested, get a hold. College of St. Joseph the Worker. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Bye now.